more difficult. So if you see
Yeah,
my face has changed, it's because of yesterday.
yeah. I want to start with what has happened yesterday and the day before because we had two ceremonies in Tehran yesterday and the day before, and today they're in Qom and the city of Qom. But starting with what has happened yesterday, I think this was huge, even comparing to the funeral of the first supreme leader of Iran, Imam Khomeini. And many people were arguing before the funeral to say that that would never happen again for Iranians, and that was the huge that because it was huge during those days. You remember both of them. I wasn't there during those days. I was a little kid, but you remember both of them. How do you compare the two? And how do you see, how did you find it yesterday? Because before coming to this live, you said how you felt, how you saw in each and every street, little streets where, the crowd was there and the people were there, all the, you know, gathering. It was huge. Looking at the footages that came out of Iran, I'm gonna play some of those clips. But just you mentioned, how do you compare the two?
Well, as you know, right now, the funeral is in Qom, and in Qom, the city of Qom, the crowds are massive. And this, of course, is Tehran yesterday, what you're showing. Um, as I was telling you before we began the program, that it took me hours to get to the funeral, and I was stuck in traffic. And and then you had to walk a long way. Many people took the metro, but we went by car, and so we parked the car very far away, and we walked for kilometers just to get to the main street. The weather, the heat in it's Tehran in the summer is very hot. I think yesterday was 35, 36 degrees. The same was true the day before and the day before that. So people were all wearing black uh, because for the ceremony, and especially for women, it was very warm. Um, we walked for hours, and for a number of reasons, they decided to change uh, the route of the place in which the martyrs would enter the procession, which caused confusion. But it was amazing. It was extraordinary. I This is without a doubt the largest funeral that the world has ever seen, and it was much larger than even Imam Khomeini's funeral. Of course, the population of Iran has grown too, and the population of Tehran is bigger today than it was back then. So you have to take that into account. But this was extraordinary, and even when sorry, I thought I got cut off. So even when it, like as I was going to the funeral, it took me almost 3 hours to get there. On the way, you did see people on the streets, like far away, walking, shopping, or going. But a lot of those who didn't go, they were wearing. I was telling you before the show, were wearing black. So even those who didn't go to the funeral, if you were in Tehran, if you were driving through Tehran to get to the funeral, far away, because I live far from where the funeral was, you would see a lot of people in in at least who appear to be in mourning. Um, it was significantly larger than the funeral of General Soleimani, which was itself very huge, and the funeral for the Ayatollah Raisi was very enormous too. Probably not as huge as General Soleimani's for obvious reasons. He was murdered by the Americans. And then after the riots in Iran, we had those huge gatherings in Tehran, where in the West they were calling it all AI. If you recall, and I was on Piers Morgan's show, and they brought this crazy woman in Canada who said on his show that when they're finished with me, the biggest piece of my body will be my little finger. And then she keeps getting invited on his show. That just shows how mad, how crazy things are in the West. But she said that this is AI, and he was saying it, implying that it's AI, basically. But this was so massive that, and then one smart thing that they did was that they invited a lot of people to Iran, a lot of journalists, mostly alternative media or non-mainstream media, but a lot of them and a lot of influential people. So it's almost impossible for the West to pretend that this is thousands of people or tens of thousands of people or hundreds of thousands of people. This was in well over 10 million yesterday. And then if you include uh, the people who went the day before and the day before that, I mean, who knows what the numbers are. But I mean, there are different numbers out there, but I haven't been following closely. So it was a massive show of force. And the emotions, I mean, not yesterday, but the day before yesterday when they had the prayer uh, over the for the for the martyrs, Ayatollah Khamenei and his granddaughter, 1-year-old little girl, his um, daughter, his son-in-law. And that was I couldn't. I was stuck with hundreds of thousands of people to the south of. This is Qom. This is right. This is today in the city of Qom. The footage that you're showing, just for the sake. I know you know this. I'm saying it for the sake of your viewers. So this is separate from what we saw yesterday and the day before. So the day before yesterday, I tried to get to the prayers. I couldn't because I was stuck literally with hundreds of thousands of other people to the south of the Musalla, the complex where the prayers were being held. And you have to be behind the prayer leader. So we were literally in front of him. And we were stuck. We couldn't do anything. That just shows how massive it was. And we couldn't move. Like, I mean, it was just, there's so many people. So the point I'm making is that, and the prayers, even though we couldn't pray because we were stuck in the wrong place, when we were listening to the prayers inside the musalla, the people around me were all, I mean, I don't know if everyone, but you could hear people sobbing and crying all around. It was very emotional. The point is that this was not only just a show of force, but this is far beyond. You know, sometimes in the West they say there's this rally around the flag effect in Iran. This is not a rally around the flag. This is far beyond that. This shows that the popular legitimacy of the Islamic Republic, despite maximum pressure sanctions, despite terrorism, despite the attempts to bring about for insurrection by the West, of course, despite all these hardships, the wars, the multiple wars imposed on Iran by the West and the Zionists, the popular legitimacy of the Islamic Republic of Iran is far greater than any Western country. Now, this is something that people, elites in the West would, they'd be shocked to hear this, but that's a fact. They can deny it all they want. They could never bring such crowds to the streets, and they could never bring such emotion, such an outburst of emotions. It's just, so the depth of the legitimacy, the popular legitimacy, and the size of the popular legitimacy, it's just, it's extraordinary. And this, and then you see in Qom today and tomorrow, I'm sure the crowds in Iraq will be very huge. And Qom is hotter than Tehran. When I told you how, you can look at my face, imagine how it is right now in Qom, which is, as you know, hotter than Tehran, the much hotter. And then imagine how it's going to be in Iraq, because Iraq in this time of year is, gosh, God knows what it's like in Najaf and Cal. I mean, I was there once for summer, in the summer for pilgrimage, and you just couldn't go out during the day. For me, it was too much. We'd go out at night, late at night. So the point is that this is a huge show of force. And then last night we heard the news that the Iranian, someone struck 2 ships near the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranians, of course, don't take responsibility. They just, we just hear 2 ships. I can imagine it may have been from Iran. I doubt it was the Kuwaitis or the Saudis, but in any case, so Iran, struck 2 ships. I think it has a lot to do with this show of force, because the Iranians during the last 2-3 days, I've been told that they did not want tensions in the Persian Gulf because of the ceremony, because of all the people on the streets. But I think the show of force was so enormous that they decided last night to strike 2 tankers that refused to obey the Iranian military. Because, as you know, according to the MOU between the United States and Iran, the Strait of Hormuz during the period of the MOU's enforcement is under the authority of Iran. And the Americans, they opened up their own corridor in violation of the MOU. I mean, they're violating everything about the MOU that they can. So the Iranians threatened these ships to go back, and they ignored Iran. So 2 ships were struck last night. And I think that this is not unrelated to the immense show of force that we saw and we continue to see today in Qom. So even though they wanted no tensions during this period, but I think that the power was so, the show of force was so effective that they said, no, we're going to enforce the regulations in the Persian Gulf. Now, one other thing that I wanted to say was that when before, and I was saying this to friends, maybe I said this to you as well. Before the funeral, I was wondering how I knew it would be huge turnout. I was absolutely certain about that, but I was wondering if it would be, how big it was, because it's been over 4 months since Ayatollah Khamenei was martyred, and so those raw emotions that people felt during the first few days and first few weeks, we're no longer like that anymore. So we have a new leader. The war has played itself out up to a point, at least until we've reached this point. It's been over 4 months. But you would have thought, if you were in the crowd yesterday, that he had just been murdered he had been martyred the day before. That's how people felt. So it's over 4 months, but you'd think it's like right after, if you didn't know, you just were dropped into this crowd, you think he'd just been martyred. So I think this is going to have a huge impact on Iran's foreign policy in the weeks and months and years ahead. It's going to give them more power, more authority. The negotiators are going to feel more empowered with all this I mean, on the streets, Nima, people would like those who recognize me, they'd come up to me and say, "Don't come," like as if I'm a negotiator, which I'm not. But for some reason, many people seem to think I'm involved. And the more I deny it, the more they think, "Oh, so he must really be involved." But people would come up to me and say, "We have to be tougher. We want revenge," and they want revenge. People from from Trump, Netanyahu, the leadership in the United States, and the leadership in the Israeli regime, of course. So the anger among Iranians is huge. The demands for revenge are enormous. But in any case, I think that's going to make the negotiators much tougher at the negotiating table. I think it's going to make the Iranian armed forces deal with greater assertiveness towards the United States, the Supreme National Security Council, the state. This is going to have a huge impact. And I think outside, beyond Iran's borders, it's going to have an enormous impact, because countries recognize that Iran won a war, they won the siege warfare, they won at the negotiating table, and in fact, many Iranians are in the funeral were saying this deal is not good enough. A lot of them were critical of the deal. But in any case, in the West, they're saying this was this deal. In anyone who read the text, it was a victory for Iran. But criticisms aside, some of them are quite valid. But in any case, this is what we have. But so you put all those together, those victories, this string of victories, and then add this funeral that's ongoing, and it's just victory after victory after victory for Iran, and it's going to enhance Iran's stature and position across the globe. And finally, this is terrible news for Trump, and this is terrible news for the Israeli regime. And it gives Iran and its allies uh, a new energy to support the Palestinian people. And by the way, uh, a Palestinian friend of mine was telling me today. He said it's a good thing that I remind people about Gaza on different shows. So since he told me that, I just wanted to remind everyone that we have to always keep Gaza in our minds, think about Gaza, and remind people about Gaza, and keep the issue of Palestine and especially Gaza in front of the eyes of the world, uh, to increase pressure on the enemies of the Palestinian people.
Uh, Professor Marandi, the country Iran I know, since the revolution, it was always this sort of mindset in the mind of decision makers in Iran that the United States is going to attack sooner or later. They're going to attack Iran. It was always the case because of the identity of the revolution. It was anti-imperialism. It was against the U.S. leverage, U.S. pressure in the region, dominance in the region. They didn't want that. And so that was always the case, that the war gonna come. But the way that the United States started this war was so much shocking, because many people never thought that they're gonna start with the assassination of the supreme leader, with the assassination of those kids in the primary school in Minab. These were huge shocks for the Iranian people. And this is the way it is today, because their understanding, as I understand it, it was that it's going to be all on the battlefield. It's going to be the two armies coming together and fighting each other, not assassination, not the way that Israel fights its wars. This was, I think that was a moving sort of shock for Iranian people.
Yes, I mean, even and on a sort of, I digress, but even I don't follow football that much, if at all. But even this whole incident, or this whole affair where Trump forced FIFA to allow a U.S. player who was banned from the game with Belgium, forcing them to allow him to play. That is very symbolic of U.S. behavior in general. Trump is more crude than previous U.S. presidents, but the United States sees itself as above the law, with special privileges. It can do whatever it wants, and because they see themselves as exceptional, and this is true across the West when it comes to the United States. They think that they have the moral authority to slaughter kids, to destroy the lives of millions of people, whether it's Afghanistan or Iraq or Libya or anywhere. This is the this is the United States, and so this is how they treat the rest of the world. And so Iranians always felt that, or at least the elites in Iran felt that there was ultimately going to be war. Now, not everyone believed that. I think the liberal faction in the Iranian political elite thought that they could have some sort of deal with the United States, and if we dealt with them differently, that they would leave us alone. And that obviously was naive, and it didn't work. And actually, many of them, their views have evolved. Uh, a couple of weeks ago, I think I said somewhere else that this was on Iranian television. I saw it online, so I'm not sure if it was from an Iranian TV channel or it was one of those Iranian online programs. But one of the reformist the head of one of the reformist political parties in Iran, was on a show, and he said that Ayatollah Khamenei was right about building these underground missile bases and developing Iran's missile technology and drone technology. And if we were in control of the armed forces, Iran would have collapsed by now. He was saying that. He was saying we were wrong. And you remember as well as I, in Iran, there was a lot of criticism directed towards Ayatollah Khamenei over the last couple of decades about Iran's drone program. They were the West was making fun of Iran's drones. Back then, uh, Iran, I think the only country that was really well, I'm not sure if it was the only country, but it was the only country that I recall that was really pursuing drones was Iran, and they were making fun of Iran's drones until, of course, the Ukraine war began and the Russians began using Iranian drones, and they were making fun of Iran's missile program, criticizing. And so many people in Iran, politicians, people in government, even in different administrations, were criticizing the money spent for the underground bases, the drone program, the missile program, and basically criticizing Ayatollah Khamenei for that. Even though Iran's military expenditure is lower than other countries in the region, but instead of buying far lower, and instead of purchasing lots of jets from foreign countries and things like that, expensive planes, they went and developed a military strategy which was less expensive, more indigenous. They invested in technology, and ultimately it worked because the Iranians knew that if, let's say, they bought 200 jets or 150, 250, I don't know, 150 jets or whatever, very expensive, that the Americans would have still outgunned them, and they couldn't have won the war that way. So they really thought about can we fight a war with Americans and win? And this is a strategy that's been pursued more or less for decades. And after the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, it intensified. So people now are seeing that Ayatollah Khamenei's military strategy, because it's his strategy, he was the one who presided over it for the last few decades, was brilliant. And even though he was martyred, and so many of the commanders in last year's war and this year's war were murdered, the country won the war. And it wasn't just about survival. I mean, many people were saying during the war, well, if Iran just survives that. During the first week, people thought Iran would collapse outside of Iran. Many of us here didn't think that way. I was confident Iran would win. Many others were confident too. Perhaps not to the degree that it actually did win, but we were confident. But many people thought Iran would be defeated. Then gradually, after a week or so, when they saw that Iran wasn't going to fold, they said, well, if Iran just survives, that's a win. But Iran did far more than just survive. Till the last moment, they were hammering U.S. bases, Israeli regime assets, and those regimes that were assisting the United States in the war in the region. So he was vindicated, despite all the critiques in Iran by liberals mostly. And as I said, many of them now accept this. So what the United States has done is that it has helped demolish the worldview of many liberals in Iran who thought that we could, if we behaved differently towards the United States, that the United States would behave in a more reasonable manner towards Iran. People don't think that way anymore.
Yeah. I think his role in what Iran is today, economically, militarily, strategically, regionally, geopolitically, is so bold. And I remember during those days of negotiations, there were people who were arguing, well, we may negotiate on the missile program of Iran, we may do something about it. But he said that no, that's not going to happen. That's the red line. And I think his role in what is happening today and what has happened, during the war between Iran and the United States is so important, not only in the military aspect, but also in the institution he has created for many years. This sort of command system of multiple layers that he has created that finally led to, to the outcome that we've seen with the war, that you assassinate the commanders, the supreme leader, you don't see the collapse coming to the system because the system is working. The system is somehow in multiple layers, and they can reproduce. The system can reproduce itself. This is the outcome of his leadership, I think, because right after the revolution, we had the war between Iran and Iraq, and after the war, the first supreme leader of Iran passed away. So he started with huge problems domestically, geopolitically, economically. And today, what he delivered to the Iranian people, to the Iranian history, it's unbelievable.
And, if you look at the situation in Iran today, we've been under maximum pressure sanctions for decades. We've gone through 2 wars in the last year. They've destroyed a lot of infrastructure or damaged it. And we've had a siege for, I don't know, 2-3 months on all of our ports. So the economy has been hit hard during this period. The people who came to his funeral, many of them are from the disenfranchised, the working class, the people who've suffered the most as a result of these wars. And you know as well as I that going to this funeral will take a full day. Just getting there and going. I mean, when I got back home, I had to sleep for a couple of hours. I was so exhausted. I mean, I'm not young anymore, but in any case, it was almost 3 hours on my way there. I don't know I don't remember how long it took me to get back, but I was there for like I don't know. We walked for quite a few hours from near Engelov Street to Azadi Square, and then back to Engelov Square. It was many kilometers, but some people walked all the way from Imam Hussein. Sorry, your audience doesn't know what I'm talking, but they walked a lot more than me. Some went. The streets of Tehran were crowded at 5 a.m. The funeral didn't even begin until like 8 or so. So, and a lot of these people, as I said, these are like working class families, working class people with more than enough trouble, to handle. But they spent so much time going there, and that's because he, based on Islamic and Shia tradition in particular, supported the oppressed or supported the disenfranchised. Imam Khomeini was like that too, and in his massive funeral, you saw the same elements. You saw people from all walks of life, but the people who really give the most support are those who are from the classes that or in society that are more vulnerable. And of course, his position across the world was the same. He supported liberation movements in Southern Africa during when he was president. He traveled to the frontline countries in Southern Africa to boost them and to help them support the resistance against apartheid South Africa. He supported Cuba, especially when it was really bad after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Nicaragua, Venezuela, when Venezuela is facing tough times now, and I have friends there, and it's very sad. But when the Americans were targeting the economy a few years ago, he gave them a lot of assistance at a time when Iran was under maximum pressure sanctions. I mean, Iran's capabilities to help are limited. And then, of course, the most important of all is the Palestinian cause and his sympathy for the Palestinian people and his optimism about the future of Palestine is, I think, known to everyone. So he was always a person based on his ideological worldview, who supported the deprived and the oppressed and the disenfranchised wherever they were. And in Iran, despite all the difficulties as a result of war and sanctions and violent riots and and military um, armed insurgencies. Despite all that, and carried out by the West, he you know he tried his best to encourage different administrations with their differing worldviews. Some of them were liberal, some of them were left. He encouraged all of them to focus on the disenfranchised in Iran during difficult circumstances and under ordinary circumstances. And that is a part of the reason why he's so popular. And that is why Iran has been so steadfast in its support for the Palestinian people. And that is why so many millions of people, went to the streets. You know this as well as I. There's a huge Persian media apparatus outside of Iran that's all hostile, funded by Western governments. There's nothing like it for any other country, not for Russia, not for China. And the reason is that back in the day when Russia had still not risen and China and Russia were still not the powers that they are now, Iran was the focus of the West's hatred. Remember the axis of evil and all that. So they were funding at that time, they were funding all these media outlets in Persian. And so all the time they were saying, why are you spending money to support the Palestinians? Why are you giving money to these Arabs? I mean, these Persian media outlets, them, they are very racist, very anti-Muslim, very I mean they're horrible. But they're constantly telling the Iranians these Arabs hate you. These Sunni Palestinians hate you. They hate the Shia. They think you're not Muslim. They think you're they're enemies, and they were constantly fed this propaganda so that in order to create friction in Iran, to create a wedge between the population and Ayatollah Khamenei and those who are supporting the Palestinian cause. They've been doing this for decades, but to no avail. And we saw in the funeral that all of these conspiracies against the country, all these attempts to undermine the popularity of the revolution, the Islamic Republic, to undermine its support for resistance organizations and resistance groups and the disenfranchised and the marginalized, all of these have led to nothing. All you have to do is just look at the footage, and you see that all that money spent, all those many billions of dollars of money spent, all of those sanctions, all of those wars, and that says a lot, not just about Ayatollah Khamenei and his leadership, but it says a lot about the Iranian people.
How does Iran see the region? We've seen Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and these countries coming to the funeral, and I think after all, the relationship or the partnership, I don't know, we can call it partner, the relationship between Iran and GCC countries is in a new phase, is a new sort of era. But in this new era of which is imposed by the outcome of the war, it's not something coming out of nowhere, because the war has happened between Iran and the United States. GCC countries will participate in helping the United States and their attack on Iran. Then you see Iran, coming out of this war, forcing the United States out of region. The attacks on the American bases in GCC countries, it was huge. Look at the outcome of the war for Iranian people, for Iranian army, for IRGC. And these people are watching that in GCC countries, looking at what's going on, for example, with their security in the region. They have a very important decision to make. And how do you see that decision on their part? Are they going to learn from what has happened so far? Are they going to continue on the same path as before this war started? What is the understanding, perception on the part of Iranians with the ongoing talks between the two sides, Iranians and GCC countries?
It's difficult to say. I mean, these countries are ruled by family dictatorships, and they've been bound to the West. And I mean, all of their children, their children, their parents, they went to the West to study. They go to the West for vacation. Their money is invested in the West. They take huge amounts of wealth from these countries for themselves, and they put them in in invest them in Western economies and take, palaces and apartments and mansions. So, and I'm sure many of them are deeply compromised. I mean, the Epstein um, files do show that the Epstein class exists in the Persian Gulf, especially in the Emirates. Senior people linked to Epstein were exposed, and I'm sure there are many other Epsteins out there, and big and small. So it's hard to say if they are reasonable. There's a path forward, and there has been some change, as we discussed before, where in recent weeks, when the Americans would violate the ceasefire and attack Iran, um, the Iranians would strike U.S. bases in the region. And in the last few instances, they did not strike bases in Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, or Qatar, but they did in Kuwait and Bahrain. And the last time, also, they hit Jordan, a U.S. base in Jordan, very hard, destroying a lot of U.S. equipment there. So there's a reason why they haven't been bombing these countries. So there is progress. But at the same time, it's very complicated. A big piece of news was, as we discussed before, the Iranian passenger airliner that flew to Yemen. And this is a big deal. It broke the siege on Yemen that was like 10 years there for 10 years. But the Saudis tried to prevent the Iranian passenger plane from landing. That's harassing a passenger plane is no small thing. They failed. The pilot was courageous, and he continued to move towards the airport, and he landed. But what the point I'm making is that the gap is great, but there is a history where Iran has forgiven these regimes in the past. In the 1980s, at the behest of the West, and the United States, they supported Saddam Hussein's invasion of Iran when the West and Germany in particular gave him chemical weapons. They funded that, and they funded the Saddam's armed forces, hundreds of billions of dollars. Back then, money was worth a lot more than today. But after the war, when Saddam went and invaded one of them, Kuwait, these countries wanted rapprochement with Iran, and Iran forgave them. And in the 90s, we had relatively good relations with these countries, even though they had helped kill, I don't know how many people exactly were martyred in the war with Saddam, but I think if you include the assassinations that across Iran through the MEK and the support for terrorists in Kurdish areas, probably near almost 200,000, all in all, everything together, 190,000 or so. So they were involved, deeply involved, just like they were involved in this war. But Iran does want a stable Persian Gulf. They want regional countries to move closer to each other, and they want the Americans out. So if they choose to change policy, the Iranians would definitely be more than willing to also move in that direction. But again, so many of them are deeply compromised, and it's difficult to say what lies ahead. But there's no doubt that the 4.5 months or 4 months or so that we've gone through, including the ongoing funeral, has put Iran in a much stronger position. And I think the funeral itself is enhancing Iran's stature and strength by the hour, literally.
I think since the revolution has happened in Iran, we had this terrorist group first in Iraq, then went to Europe, MEK, Mujahideen, as they call it in Iran. And what has happened recently that you see those people who are close, who are supporting the monarchists, and this was new because they basically are doing what the MEK has been doing for such a long time. Cooperating with Israelis or making chaos in Iran, coordinating those sort of riots in Iran. They were they were merging into MEK. This was something new for Iranian people, because before the people in Iran, they thought, at least some people in Iran thought, that these are nationalists. They want Iran to be better, to improve, to be great country. But you see during the war, they're coming out and no, hit the infrastructure in Iran. These are the infrastructures of regime. It's all about regime. Go ahead and hit the people. People are happy with this sort of death and destruction that is happening. This was something new for Iranian people as well.
Well, when they bombed the school in Minab, they were saying in war things happen. Like, and people in Iran were outraged. Well, the MEK and the monarchists are tools of the West. But what has happened in this war is that many Iranians living abroad who've been exposed to all this anti-Iranian propaganda by both by the Western media, but also this elaborate anti-Iranian Persian language media, they've changed the situation for the Iranian diaspora and the younger generation, many of whom have never been to Iran and don't even speak any Persian. There's been a sea change in mentality. So this lost when we think about it, the defeat of the American and the Israeli regime is very multi-layered. There are many ways that you could sit down and think about many issues that you can sit down and think about, and they've been defeated on all these different fronts. I think that the sea change that we've seen among at least many in the diaspora is linked to the broader shift that we're seeing across the world. People across the world are seeing that the Iranians, the axis of resistance, they're the only people who are sincerely supporting the Palestinians. And the West, they're the only ones who are supporting the genocide. And so already for the last 2-3 years, the narrative has been collapsing about Iran bad and the West good, and Iran violating human rights and the West being the supporters of human rights. That whole model was collapsing. And then in this war, when people across the world saw people, Iranians on the streets and steadfast, and then this funeral, Nima, was also different in the sense that it was almost impossible for anyone to deny its importance. In the past, even for General Soleimani, which was huge, or Ayatollah Raisi, which was also very large, huge too, but General Soleimani a bit bigger, I think. I don't know the numbers, but that was my feel. But this was so enormous that people are saying, this is extraordinary. And so the soft power of Iran has been enhanced significantly, and I think that this is irreversible. I don't think that the West is going. I mean, every day we're seeing people being killed in Gaza, every single day. And yesterday we saw 3 people murdered in Lebanon. A school principal, she was murdered along with her husband and I think a housekeeper who worked for them. And in Gaza, large numbers of people. This is happening every day. And so people are seeing across the world that the country that's supporting the Palestinian people, you have the millions of people on the streets on that country supporting the state. And then meanwhile, you still see the Israelis slaughtering people in the West. They're quiet. Western journalists look away. Western diplomats are quiet. Western elites look away. And that's not something that people that people ignore. People are looking at this and rethinking their whole worldview, and they're looking at Iran in a very different light. The axis of resistance, Hezbollah, in a very different light. I mean, the extraordinary resistance that Hezbollah put up against the Israeli regime for the last few months. The fact that Iran was willing to go back to war for the sake of Lebanon. And the fact that all of these entities gave such sacrifices for Gaza. I mean, Ayatollah Khamenei is the greatest martyr for Gaza, and Seyed, the same is true with Seyed Hassan Nasrallah. So things are changing; they're evolving. If you just go back three years, we were living in a very different world.
I think that was revealing for many people around the world about the acts of resistance, because before it was all Iran using these people. These are proxies of Iran. Iran is using them in order to achieve its goals. But you see how, you know, Hezbollah sacrificed itself during the war. You know, the leadership of Hezbollah was assassinated, and you see the leadership in Iran was assassinated. Multiple layers of commanders in Iran were assassinated, and you see the some sort of unity. And you see, for many people, it was revealing for many people, because they had no idea how the acts of resistance work. And they see right now it doesn't matter if it's in Iran, in Lebanon, in Yemen, it's all the same, because they're seeking the same sort of agenda, the same sort of objective, which is the liberation of the people in Palestine, the liberation of, you know, Lebanon and Syria. But by the way, Syria is under occupation right now. And this is, in my opinion, shattered the whole propaganda machine about Iran and how Iran is manipulating the whole you know, region in favor of itself. Which, by the way, I don't know what was the benefit from Iran for those people who were arguing that Iran is benefiting from that. Iran is sacrificing to achieve the
Iran
liberation.
was sacked, and 47 years, for 47 years, we've gone through 3 wars. There's a reason for that. You know, in the 1980s, Iran was supporting the Palestinians. In the 1980s, Iran helped Hezbollah liberate and resist in Lebanon, and ultimately liberate Lebanon. They were paying for this, and they were sanctions from the beginning of the revolution, and they increased until they reached maximum pressure sanctions under Obama. And then, as I said, 3 wars, sanctions, armed insurrection, color revolutions or violent riots, to be more precise. Then, and of course, violent violence against Iranian supporters across the region. Whoever supported Iran would go to jail, whether it's in Bahrain or anywhere else in the region, destroying countries that were supporting the axis of resistance, like Syria, you know, destroying its infrastructure. So, you know, Iran has sacrificed a lot. Of course, no one has sacrificed more than the Lebanese supporters of the resistance. They are the true heroes of our era, in our time. They've had, just in the last 3-4 years, maybe 10,000 martyrs. And for a small country, and especially the supporters of the resistance being a very important segment of that small country, imagine how many people, you know, compared to that size, what hardship they've been going through, but they've remained resilient and principled. You know, that's why I always, you know, I've been saying that people should read more about Iran. Sometimes people tell me, you say this all the time, but I still think people should read more. I mean, going to Tehran by the Leverets, it's an important book for people to read, because there's very little literature out there that I find worthy. There may be other books I don't know of, but, you know, Alistair Crook's Resistance is a good book to read. And on the nuclear program, again, Peter Oborn's A Dangerous Delusion and Manufactured Crisis by Gareth Porter, who these days seems to be off the radar. I think he may be ill or something. He's quite old. But, you know, and now is the time for people to read more and to understand the context of what has been happening over the past 4.5 decades. The Iranians have made sacrifices throughout this period. There's no doubt. The people who say that Iran who used to say Iran is using these, you know, the Palestinian cause for its own benefit, they are people linked to those regimes who do nothing, and they have an agenda because they want to justify their inaction. So they promote sectarianism, like the Qataris and Erdogan, Saudi Arabia. They try to be cynical about anything that the resistance does. This is just behind the scenes, Iran and the United States are actually allies. This is what they would say for years. Or now they're saying Iran is not doing enough. Iran is betrayed. Like now they're saying Iran. Why isn't Iran helping Hezbollah more? Why isn't Iran helping him? No matter what Iran does, Iran is the bad. There's something wrong with Iran's policies. And these criticisms, when you look carefully, they're all coming from the same proxies of the United States that from the very beginning of the revolution, and before the revolution, they had sold out the Palestinians.
I think besides those books that you mentioned that are good to read for foreigners, I think it's better. They can go to Iran. It's the best way to understand, to know Iran.
Of course.
Go and see
Yeah, of
Iran by
course.
yourself.
Of course. And there may be other books, and some say, why do you, mention books written by non-Iranians? Unfortunately, I haven't seen anything really good written by an Iranian. I haven't written anything, so I'm in no position to criticize others. But I have no time to be very blunt about it. But still, that's not an excuse. But there's very little material out there. But yes, people should go to Iran, visit Iran. But people should also remember these days, these funerals. 2 months from now, 6 months from now, 2 years from now, when they say the regime is unpopular, the people. I mean, it's just. Someone told me that the New York Times. Oh, an Iranian journalist. She tweeted yesterday that the BBC contacted her and did an interview with her, and they said, did people go to the funeral to get sandwiches? I mean, this is the BBC. Like, really? You spend 3 hours to go to a funeral, and then you're under the sun, the heat, and like you walk for hours, and you're exhausted, and then you have to go back home, and you're exhausted, and you fall, and then like you get a sandwich from someone. I mean, these people, they just look for some stupid, idiotic way to. I mean, they hear these things from these monarchists and the MEK. You know what I'm talking about? That's Sandishkhor and Sandvi. So that's sort of ridiculous nonsense. Sorry, that's Persian, but they get it from them because of their own ignorance. And then I'm sure that the people at the BBC, they hear this from their colleagues in BBC Persian, who are, they're so hostile towards Iran that it's just unbelievable. But that's how they are. Or, for example, I was thinking about another story. Oh, the New York Times was saying that that some people went to the funeral out of curiosity. I mean, they didn't see the footage. Like, there were some people that, I mean, it's like it was really a tough day, and the people went there out of curiosity. And the justifications or the arguments that these Western journalists make to serve the agenda of their overlords or their masters or their bosses is sometimes so ridiculous that I don't know if you saw that I tweeted about this Reuters report a couple of days ago, saying that the Iranian state or something is mobilizing the people on the streets, and like, what does it mean, mobilizing? What does that mean? Like, are we soldiers or something? And then, but reports say, it's a tweet. People can find it on it's like a couple of days ago. But it's been said or reported that people in Tehran or people across Iran were celebrating the death of Ayatollah Khamenei behind closed windows or something like that.
Yeah. I saw that.
Like, what? That's Reuters. I mean, the propaganda in the New York Times and in Reuters and in the BBC is getting so bad that I mean, I think that the worst days of the Soviet propaganda would be better than this. But anyway,
I think the proper name for BBC Persian is BBC Anti-Persian, or anti-Iran international. These are against Iranian people, Iranian culture, Iranian, Iran as a country. They're not doing anything good for the Iranian society. They're basically receiving,
Do you have time
money.
for me to tell you a story, like 2-3
Go
minutes?
ahead. Go ahead.
I was once invited by the BBC to do a debate in Beirut, and it's a long story. I agreed, and then it was a 1 hour debate. Like uh, I forgot the name of the show, but anyway, it's online. And I agreed. And then they wanted to cancel me. And the reason was that the place where they set up their tent was AUB, the American University of Beirut. And the American University of Beirut, under orders from the State Department, said so and so, meaning me, is not allowed on campus. Even though a few years before, 3-4 years earlier, I was a fellow at that university. I was a visiting fellow. I was there for my sabbatical. So they said, "Well, we can't invite you." I said, "It's fine, but you can't. But you can't go to AUB and do it. You have to go somewhere else." And they said, "Well, we spent money," and I said, "No, either that you do, I create problems for you." And what I did was I contacted media in Lebanon, told them the story, and then some students went and protested at AUB. The media, Al Mayadeen and Al Akhbar and Al Manar and other media outlets were criticizing AUB and the BBC for this policy. And then the BBC reversed the invitation. But that's not this. That was just the introduction. So I did the debate, and there was 2 hours. It was 2 hours. One was an hour for BBC English, and then the second hour was the same format, different guests, Arabic speakers for Arabic. So we were literally there for 2 hours. And so you had a big crew from the BBC, both Arabic and English, large numbers of people, because both shows were back to back. The shows were back to back. At the end, after we did our debate, and I went and sat with the BBC people and others, and we were just talking. And some of the audience people also joined us because the second debate was finishing or had just finished, the Arabic one. And so there were lots of people, like they were giving them like sandwiches and I don't know, drinks and so on. And so we were talking, and I was in a circle of like 10, 15 people from the BBC, Arabic and English. And then one of the people, and I think it was BBC Arabic, but maybe it was English, I don't recall, said that, it's very interesting. In the BBC, like in BBC Arabic, we have people from all over the Arab world. And they all, regardless of where they come from, like to see their country shown in a positive light, wherever they are. And then they say, but it's interesting. In BBC Persian, they hate Iran. And everyone's, yeah, you're right. Yeah, exactly. Like all the people standing in the circle, as we were talking, like 10, 15 people, they're all BBC, except for maybe me or one or two other people. They were all saying, yes, exactly. It's really interesting how the people at BBC Persian are so negative about their country. So all these Arab countries, all of them dictatorships, proxies of the United States, maybe one or two, exceptions to the rule. But for the most part, that's how it is. Maybe you can exclude Algeria or Tunisia or a couple of other countries to a point. But that's BBC Persian. And Iran International makes BBC Persian